Well, good afternoon, and welcome to Musselman Library on this sort of overcast February Sunday afternoon. Overcast weather sometimes works pretty well in this space, which has wonderful windows to the outside, but can cause problems for things like photography and projecting. So thank you so much for being here. I'm Carrie Phillips, Library Director, and I'm really grateful for your interest and curiosity in today's talk, which will introduce you to a small selection of some of Bluffton University's most treasured historical collections, Anabaptist and Mennonite hymnals. I'm grateful to Gerald Mast, my colleague here at Bluffton, and the coordinator of the event series, which complements the exhibit of artwork from the Voices Together hymnal, which is currently on display in the gallery of the Souter Visual Arts Center, way on the other side of campus, for the invitation to participate in the events series with this presentation. I'm aware that this presentation might be of interest to a broader audience. I've had a number of people ask, will you record it? Will this be live streamed? Many of my friends and colleagues are participating in the Mennonite Arts Weekend in Cincinnati, and so we're attempting to record the presentation for wider sharing, so thank you for your patience with our technology. I'll just provide a bit of introduction for those of you who may not know me well. I'm a 1999 graduate of Bluffton College and a 2006 graduate of the University of Washington's Information School with a Master of Library and Information Science degree and fieldwork specializing in archives and special collections. I'm also a lifelong hymn singer. My growing up church background is in the United Church of Christ and in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, but I have very, very deep Swiss Mennonite roots in the Schantz ancestors on my father's side of the family. So you can see here, John H. Schantz would be my great-great-grandfather. His name appears on the cornerstone, not the Board of Trustees stone plaque that's on the side of College Hall, and that's his picture, circled in yellow. Since the summer of 2005, it has been a true pleasure, both as my professional vocation and because of this Mennonite family history, to have served as the caretaker and librarian for Musselman Library's special collections. In that role, I've had numerous opportunities to learn about and then share Bluffton's preserved examples of Anabaptist and Mennonite print culture, including showing off some of the wonderful examples of products of this culture from the library's collections. Through this work, Bluffton has been able to contribute to the deepening of our community's appreciation and understanding of topics like Swiss Mennonite devotional literature, the story behind the printing of the Ephrata edition of the Martyr's Mirror in colonial-era Pennsylvania, a petting zoo experience for Bluffton undergraduates with the library's collection of folio Bibles, just to name a few, as well as our reason for gathering today, looking together at examples of Mennonite hymnals from those special collections. Since August of 2020, I've been serving as the director for Bluffton's Musselman Library, and those responsibilities have necessitated a shift in my focus toward more administrative and operational tasks related to keeping the campus library innovating so as to meet the information needs of all of our students. However, opportunities like this one confirm for me that archives and special collections work will probably always be my first love, and I think it's a love language of sorts that I can use to connect Bluffton University and our campus community with its rich Mennonite history and to communicate that rich story to our wider community, as well as the opportunities to connect with my own family's story. So this recent deep dive into the library's hymnal collections has left me excited to share more about it with you today and wishing for more time and more capacity to chase the smaller paths of hymnal history that didn't quite make it into the display at the back of the room. Just now I mentioned a petting zoo activity. You can see a photo of one of the recent pre-pandemic versions of that activity on the screen. I crafted this activity while collaborating with a former Bluffton religion professor as a way to introduce her students to the Bible as a physical artifact. I selected 9 to 12 Bibles, usually the large size, and you can see examples of those in the photograph, brought them to a classroom, and through a very careful, guided activity, allowed the students to handle and examine these historic Bibles up close and personal. The youngest Bible in the zoo was typically our 1776 Germantown Bible, which was printed by Christopher Sauer, who, not surprisingly, was also the printer of several of the hymnals in the display at the back of the room. And the oldest was sometimes our 1531 Zurich Bible, printed by Christopher Froschauer. The students would examine both the outside of the Bible, observing what materials they noticed, like leather or vellum or brass or wood, what the inside of the Bible looked like, and what they could learn there, what language was used, or was there more than one language that could be seen? What did they think the Bible's age was? Those kinds of questions. And I would ask the students to share what characteristics of the book in front of their small group signaled to them that the book might be a Bible. And I tried not to include any ringers, though there were a few interesting examples that might have been more difficult for them to confirm. I also asked the students to identify something surprising which they discovered, and the answers to both of these questions often led to very interesting conversations with the students. And I think we could take a similar approach to thinking about the hymnals that we'll be talking about today. Those of us who regularly worship with the hymnal, or perhaps play the music from a hymnal with a piano or other instrument, probably have a picture in their minds right now of what a typical hymnal would look like. And it's true that many of the hymnals in the display would align with that model in our mind's eye. But there are other characteristics to be observed which might fall under that surprising or even confusing categorization. For example, more than half of the hymnals and songbooks featured in the display have very little or no musical notes printed inside. Many that do have printed music might show oddly shaped notes rather than the uniform oval-shaped musical notes we might be used to seeing. Unfortunately, it's not possible for us to facilitate a true petting zoo experience. Several of the hymnals are of an age or a condition such that they shouldn't be handled. So you'll see in the display some that are marked with "Please don't touch." But I've also, where possible, tried to provide a touchable copy, which you can pick up and turn through the pages. Many of the hymnals in the display are still in regular use in certain Anabaptist groups, and so more recent reprints are available, and so those are easier for us to handle. And you'll see those marked with a flag that says they're okay to touch. My initial approach to creating this talk and the display before us was to think of the ancestry of Voices Together in sort of a simplified family tree. Just prior to the pandemic's start, I had completed a preliminary survey of the library's large uncatalogued hymnal collections, and so I felt pretty confident that this kind of approach would be easy to curate in order to tell that sort of a genealogy. And for the most part, yes, that's what you'll see as you peruse the books in the display. Voices Together, the hymnal produced by Mennonite Church Canada and Mennonite Church USA, and the subject of this larger event series, is placed at the center of the U shape formed by the four tables. The two hymnals which preceded Voices Together were products of joint hymnal committees. Hymnal, a worship book, the blue hymnal, from 1992, and the red Mennonite hymnal from 1969 were produced through the work of committees with representation from the MC Mennonite Church and the General Conference Mennonite Church, the two entities which then merged to create Mennonite Church USA, as well as others in the Believers' Church tradition. These hymnals are just behind Voices Together in the center of that U. To the left, then, follows the hymnal usage of the Old Mennonite Church, or MC, and that's where I'll kind of start now. This group of Mennonites grew from early Swiss and South German Mennonite and Amish immigrants to North America, and is often referred to as the Old Mennonite Church to distinguish it from new Mennonite groups, like the Reformed Mennonite Church, the Eastern District of the General Conference Mennonite Church, and the Mennonite Brethren in Christ, all of which separated from the MC in the 19th century. The MC's ethnic background was almost entirely Swiss and South German, especially areas like the Palatinate and Alsace-Lorraine, and consisted of both Mennonites and Amish Mennonites. The display follows a number of North American MC hymnals back through colonial times, and then to hymn books which were reprinted editions of hymn books used by ancestors while still living in Switzerland and Germany, and which were brought along on their travels to North America. One such hymn book, the Ausbund, is the oldest hymn book of the early Swiss Mennonites, and according to the Mennonite Encyclopedia, it is the oldest hymn book in continuous use in any Christian church anywhere in the world, and is still in use today by Amish congregations in North America. The display includes 3 copies of the Ausbund at the very far left end of the U. 2 of these examples are facsimiles, and so they are copies of older editions of the Ausbund. They're safe to pick up and look through if you'd like. And so let me tell you a little bit about the Ausbund now. The core of the Ausbund consists of 51 hymns written by Anabaptists who were imprisoned between 1535 and 1540 in a castle in Passau, a city located in the southeast corner of Germany on the Danube River. Many of these Anabaptists were eventually executed. The first collection of these 51 hymns was printed in 1564, so not long after, and one of the facsimile copies in the display is of that original edition of the Ausbund. A larger edition was printed a short while later with 130 hymns in 1583. There were 11 total European editions, many of which were printed without identification of publication year and location to help protect their identities, as well as several American editions. The first American edition was printed by Christopher Sauer in his Germantown, Pennsylvania printing house in 1742. And the 2 other copies of the Ausbund in the display are one, which is pictured here. It's actually the 3rd edition from Christopher Sauer's print house in 1767, as well as a facsimile copy of that original 1742. Since we're celebrating the contributions of visual art elements to hymnals, I'll take a detour here for a moment and help us appreciate the visual elements which Christopher Sauer incorporated into his Ausbund printings. It's common for printers to use decorative text characters and printing ornaments like these as a way to visually enhance their products or fill empty white space on a page. And Christopher Sauer seemingly had a vast collection of such ornaments, at least 115 distinct marks, according to the Dictionary of Colonial American Printers, Ornaments, and Illustrations. In the display, you'll see that the 1767 Ausbund is displayed open to the picture of the apples in the basket, the lower left side, but there are some others that appear, and so I've taken a photograph of a few of those. And there's a picture next to the book that shows these also. Ausbund hymns are typically sung slowly and deliberately, with words which Mennonite scholar Harold Bender described as representing a spirit of a suffering church in a relentless world. One of the best-known hymns from the Ausbund is O Gott Vater, which was included in the Voices Together hymnal at number 45, so you can see this in our current hymnal, and is still sung by Amish worshipers at the beginning of each of their worship services. So let me play a short audio clip of this so you can hear what it sounds like. The hymns of the Ausbund are presented as words in verses, but do not appear with notes. This approach is present in other hymnals in the display. Often a headline at the beginning of each hymn indicates which tune should be used in the hymn's singing. Notes were not printed in the Ausbund because the tunes used were often secular tunes which were popular at the time and were assumed to be familiar to those who were singing. For example, the aforementioned hymn O Gott Vater is sung to the tune of a mid-16th century German folk tune. Before we leave the left side of the display and the Swiss South German MC context for hymnals, I should highlight another visual element appearing in the display. The book plate of Jacob Meyer appears at the front of the displayed copy of the first edition of Die kleine geistliche Harfe der Kinder Zions, the first edition of the hymn book created by the Franconia Conference of Mennonites and printed in Germantown, Pennsylvania in 1803. This hymnal was the first hymnal produced fully in America. The Franconia and Lancaster conferences met together for the purposes of creating a joint hymnal to replace other hymn books being used for their worship, but the collaboration wasn't quite successful, and the Franconia Mennonites went ahead with their own hymnal project. This book plate is a beautiful example of the Pennsylvania German folk art tradition and Mennonite school Fraktur teachings among the Franconia Mennonites. And we could make a separate exhibit of additional examples of this type of Fraktur decoration from the library's special collections, as there are more examples of it there, many of them found in copies of this hymnal. In the back of the room, there's a book titled This Teaching I Present, which shows many other examples of this type of folk art. There are additional branches and tributaries which would derive from points along that left side of the display, and these would be wonderful possibilities for additional study and curation, and probably 3 or 4 more tables. There would be, for example, conservative Mennonite congregations who would never have adopted the jointly produced hymnals at the center, and instead used or produced other hymnals and songbooks with their own familiar content. As I mentioned earlier, many of the hymnals on display are still being reprinted for current worship use in some communities. The Unparteiische Liedersammlung is still in use by some Old Order Mennonite and Old Order Amish in Pennsylvania and in the Midwest. One final anecdote of MC hymnal history, because in the display it sits close to the Liedersammlung. The number 606 is meaningful to Mennonites who are familiar with the particular setting of Thomas Ken's 1709 doxology text, Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Many Christian traditions, including the UCC and Lutheran traditions of my own past, sing this doxology to the tune Old Hundredth, composed by Louis Bourgeois in the 16th century. Joseph Funk, Mennonite songbook publisher, included Ken's doxology in the 15th edition of his singing school-style songbook, the Harmonia Sacra, published in 1876, setting it in 4-part shaped note singing to the tune Dedication Anthem at number 209. Future MC hymn books would include Dedication Anthem, but it wasn't until the publication of the 1969 Mennonite hymnal, where the hymn is published as number 606, that the numerical nickname of this hymn would become cemented. The song has become known in some circles as the Mennonite National Anthem for its use in both worship and in celebratory gatherings. Both hymnal, a worship book, and voices together include the hymn, though at different locations in each source. The dialogue and perhaps even controversy of the use and renumbering of this hymn is worth Googling just to learn more of the story. It's quite a fascinating debate. The right-hand portion of the display then, likewise, follows the hymnal and songbook editions of the General Conference Mennonite Church. This group of Mennonites organized themselves beginning around 1860, starting with just 3 congregations and eventually growing to over 500 congregations as a count of the late 1990s. As a note on the poster in the back of the display, the GCMC was formed by congregations throughout North America seeking to unite with like-minded Mennonites to pursue common goals such as higher education and mission work. The conference was especially attractive to recent Mennonite and Amish immigrants to North America and expanded considerably when thousands of Russian Mennonites arrived in North America beginning in the 1870s. The conference supported a seminary and several colleges, including Bluffton University. The Global Anabaptist Mennonite Encyclopedia Online has more thorough essays on the history of both of these Mennonite groups, and so I'll encourage you to check those sources for additional historical information. The GCMC is younger than the MC Mennonite Church, and so it included some Mennonites of Swiss and South German descent, which may have separated from the MC Mennonite Church, like those in Pennsylvania who created the Eastern District Conference I mentioned earlier. A significant number also came from Dutch descent via migrations from the Netherlands to Prussia, Danzig, these are portions of present-day Germany and Poland, and Russia. Later migrations to North America settled in Canada and the central and western parts of the United States. And so the hymnal ancestry line is a little fuzzy in places on that side of the display. But in the simplified model that we're using, it made some sense to continue from left to right through the history of the hymnals and songbooks used by the General Conference toward those used by Prussian, Russian, and Dutch Mennonites to keep the sides of the U parallel. The book at the far right of the display, somewhat parallel to the significance of the Ausbund, is actually the oldest book in the display. Titled Het Offer des Heeren, or The Sacrifice of the Lord in English, it is a collection of 33 Dutch martyr stories, which eventually helped become the basis for the Martyr's Mirror, the well-known anthology of Christian martyr stories compiled by Telemann van Bracht in 1660. Where the Ausbund's core content was the collection of Swiss martyr stories from the prisoners of Passau, Het Offer des Heeren chronicled persecution of Mennonites in the Netherlands between 1527 and 1592. Each new edition was updated with the stories of martyrs executed since the previous edition was published, and in all 11 editions of the work were produced. A collection of hymns related to the martyr stories was included with each edition of Het Offer des Heeren, from the first, printed in 1562, to the last edition in 1599, which is the example in our display. This is the title page for the Liedboeksin, I think I'm saying that correctly, or songbook portion of the 1599 edition, where Peter Sebastian Jr.'s printers arranged the type in two centered triangles and incorporated decorative characteristics to make the text align symmetrically. So here's another way that visual aspects enhance our appreciation of the work. 11 of the songs in this songbook were translated into German and were included in the Ausbund. Dutch Mennonites fled persecution in the Netherlands by migrating east toward present-day Germany, Poland, and Russia, beginning as early as 1530. By the middle of the 18th century, this Mennonite population had transitioned from Dutch to High German. Prussian Mennonites transitioned their worship in the late 1760s. The first edition of this hymnal was created to provide worshipers with a collection of hymns and psalms in High German, and the display includes two later editions. Mennonites from this population eventually migrated to North America, and many formed congregations that became part of the General Conference Mennonite Church. Their first hymnal was a republication of one that was familiar to South German Mennonites. General Conference Mennonites who came from Russia continued to use a German language hymn book familiar from that region. In 1890, Gesangbuch mit Noten, or Hymnal with Notes, was produced as a revision to these older German language hymnals in an effort to unify the eastern and western portions of this youngish denomination, really just about 30 years old at that time. When the General Conference shifted toward using English more frequently in their worship practices, a new hymnal was needed, and the first, titled Mennonite Hymnal, A Blending of Many Voices, issued in two editions, was essentially just a rebranding of a non-Mennonite hymnal originally published by the A.S. Barnes Company. Later hymnals would include the English Mennonite Hymn Book of 1927 and the Mennonite Hymnary of 1940, as well as the German Gesangbuch der Mennoniten from the later 1940s for German-speaking congregations. Just as on the MC side of the display, there would be diversions and tributaries of this simplified hymnal genealogy on the General Conference side, including many additional published works which were not included in the display but are certainly worthy of our further study. And speaking of further study, it's important to properly cite your sources and credit the work of others when you are doing research, as we teach our students here at Bluffton. This project would have been immensely more difficult without the careful, diligent work of other scholars, which I'd like to review as I close my remarks. The library owns several bibliography sources about these hymnals, which I found useful for understanding the chronology of these hymn books and their production. Walter Hohmann's 1941 bibliography outlines in hymnology with an emphasis on Mennonite hymnology, and Martin Ressler's 1987 work, An Annotated Bibliography of Mennonite Hymnals and Songbooks, 1742 to 1986, were both indispensable. I made photocopies, and you should see all of the pen marks everywhere. Walter Hohmann was a professor emeritus of music at Bethel College in Kansas, serving in that role from 1923 to 1958. He was considered an authority on Mennonite hymnology and was co-editor of the Mennonite Hymnary, the General Conference Mennonite Church Hymnal of 1940. Martin Ressler was a lifelong music collector and music teacher. He's maintained one of the largest private music collections in the old Mennonite church and presumably used his collection to help in the creation of his bibliography. The Mennonite Encyclopedia and its digital complement, the Global Anabaptist Mennonite Encyclopedia Online, includes several extensive articles on hymnology of various Mennonite populations. Harold Bender, well-known Goshen College faculty member, former dean, and Mennonite scholar, wrote the essays for the hymnology of the Anabaptists, as well as articles on the Swiss, French, and South German Mennonites and the North American Mennonites, all of which help to provide more narrative context to the bibliography lists I referenced earlier. Nana Vanderzyp's 1957 Mennonite Quarterly Review article on the hymnology of Mennonites in the Netherlands and Cornelius Cron's Mennonite Encyclopedia entry for the hymnology on Prussian, Danzig, and Russian Mennonites help provide additional context for that portion of the display. And you can find these and other reference works or sources for additional study at a separate table near the display. Congregational singing brings worshipers together and creates a sense of community and shared experience. It can also help to express emotions and reinforce beliefs. Singing can provide a sense of comfort, hope, and inspiration to those who participate in it. And the collection of martyr hymns that are included in this display would be examples of singing for a sense of comfort and hope. Singing hymns in church has been personally meaningful for me since I was a young person and continues to be meaningful as I sing with my family and fellow worshipers at First Mennonite Church using Voices Together. With it, we can sing hymns that appeared in the Ausbund and in many of these other sources, unifying our voices and the words and tunes of these hymns through time. And I'm pleased to be able to be a part of telling this wider story of Voices Together with this presentation and display today. So thank you so much again for your attention and curiosity.